Hey there. I wrote a book. You're going to hear me talking about it a bunch because look, I'm really excited about it and it's a big deal in my life and it's really interesting. So I wanted to talk a little bit about things people say that confuse me when they ask me about my book. The hardest one, and I got a lot of help with this recently, is like genre. And I understand that books need to have genres, especially when it comes to physical bookstores. You gotta like have a section of the store to put it in. And you got like the sci-fi fantasy section, and you got the literature section, which is a little weird because it's a bunch of stuff, and sometimes you have stuff that's kind of sci-fi in there, like and then like the used bookstore that I really like, they got a whole big like western section and a romance section and like a mystery section and like a historical novel section, all that stuff. And I like that, and I get that things like fall into genres. I like action adventure books. I like sci-fi books. I like fantasy books. It's really interesting to me that but like there is this limitation of the genre, this like problem of the genre where if you don't fit into a genre, we're not exactly sure what to do with it, and so maybe we won't talk to you, and we don't really have a section of the publishing company that handles that. I lucked out a lot in that because of you know I think to some extent, like it's definitely a thing that because of who my brother is, but also because I already had an audience on the internet, I got to sort of overcome a lot of that stuff. Got to sort of like break past the first couple walls that might have been there otherwise without resistance. And then like once I was there, the book had to be good, but I didn't have to like deal with that. So I'm like really not ashamed of saying that this book is a good book because I think it is a good book. I don't know if I'll ever write another good book, but this one is good. Um, so I have a hard time when people are like, so what genre is it? And because I don't really know. But I was recently talking to a friend of mine who is an author, and he writes fantasy books. And he said, oh, stop thinking about sci fi fantasy or whatever. Your book is speculative fiction. And I was like, oh, speculative fiction. That's a good word for it. I like speculative fiction because it's fiction that like it thinks about the world as is, but with some slight changes or modifications, and that might be alternate history. It might be magical realism. It might be 300 years in the future. It might be like there was like it's today, but all of the electricity stopped working. So like that is what it is. It's speculative fiction for sure because it takes place now, but it takes place in a world that diverges from our world. Well, it doesn't take place right now. It takes place a little bit in the future in a world that diverges from our world, or maybe in a world that diverged from our world a couple years back or something like that. Like I don't know exactly. I don't know what year this book takes place. That's a weird thing to say, but I don't. It takes place in a world that is very much like ours. The and so like in that way, I would be super uncomfortable calling it science fiction. It's definitely not fantasy, but it is speculative fiction. So that's a good word, a phrase that I like. Um, the other thing that I've had people ask me is like, who is the book written for? Is it written for adults or is it young adult? And oh boy, that one is a mystery to me. I don't even know what that means. Is it written for adults? I guess. Who did I write it for? Why did I write it? Why did I write a book? Like then I get to deep questions very fast from that. Is it written for adults? I don't know. I hope so. I hope it's written for anybody who is okay reading a bunch of curse words, basically. There's a bunch of curse words in the book, so know that going in. They're buds in their 20s, and they use language colorfully. So, yeah, is it written for adults? That's such a strange idea. And I know that we need a section of the bookstore where the young adult books are, and I know that like books written for young adults are different, and it is important to differentiate those. It's not really a genre; it's more of a demographic difference. And ultimately, when it comes to bookstores, you can only put like a physical bookstore. You can only put a book in one section. So you have to create these sections. And maybe you could put it in 2 or 3 if it's a really big book and it's a really big store. But mostly you got to put it in one place. So I understand that that has to happen. But boy, did I not think about, and do I not think about, whether this is a book for, 15-year-olds or 55-year-olds. My hope is that it's a book for human beings and that there will be useful insight for, and not my hope, my belief. The reason I wrote this book is because I thought that it would be useful for people of a bunch of different ages. For people. In a lot of ways, the book is for me, and I'm an adult, so I guess the book is for at least one adult.